Namaskar and welcome to this very special interview with a very, very special person. I'm in conversation with somebody who is not only Union Minister of State for Science and Technology Independent Charge, but also Ministry of Earth Sciences, is also MOS, DOPT, PMO, and also Atomic Energy and Space. I am welcoming Dr. Jitendra Singh. Welcome to the show, sir. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you. We are talking about governance for which our Honorable Prime Minister has already laid down in a vast manner as to what it should be in India. What would you say about that?
No, I think if you ask me to put it in a nutshell, and if you just look back over the last 8 years, that of course Prime Minister Narendra Modi has a special penchant also, a special aptitude for governance reforms. And he's the one who gave us the mantra of reform, perform, transform. And governance, which is not only which focuses lot on transparency and citizen centricity as it should be, but I think most significantly, which is also based on trust of the citizen. So if you recall, soon after this government came in on the 26th of May 2014, one of the earliest decisions taken by this ministry in the DOPT, just by about 3 months within the government having taken over at the behest of the Honorable Prime Minister, was to do away with that time-old legacy which had been inherited from the British Empire of getting the certificates attested by gazetted officers. And we allowed self-attestation into the documents, because many of us who came from a background like me, when we grew up and went into class 9 or 10, we didn't even know where to get our certificates attested. So I think that was not only a reform meant for bringing in ease of governance, but also a huge social reform. And as I said that day when this was introduced, I said, look here, this is a message being sent out by Prime Minister Modi that now a government has taken over at the center, which has the capacity to trust the citizen and to trust the youth of this country. So I think thereafter, one after the other, it's been, abolishing of the interview to provide a level playing field to youth, regardless of whichever strata of society they come from, etc.
So basically, we're also saying there is a lot of emphasis on trust as far as citizens are concerned.
Absolutely.
So citizen-first approach is what we are really watching now.
Yes, now that we are also into outreaching to the citizen, like in the Department of India Meteorological Department, we have allowed the citizens the provision of getting the weather updates done and send us to us so that we could upload them on the website. So that apart, I think per se in governance itself, the manner in which the collector has been given the charge of, carrying out the flagship schemes and then making an entry for a competitive performance which is assessed for the PM Excellence Awards is also a huge reform, because earlier on it was mostly based on the individual profile. So I think this is ease of governance plus ease of social living, ease of living, you can say, and at the same time also it tends to have a futuristic approach about how the things are going to happen in the years to come as far as India is concerned.
So tell us more about Mission Karmayogi. Capacity Building Commission also came into existence. The whole idea is to structure governance as such. Tell us more about that.
No, I'm glad you asked that. Actually, see, if you recall earlier on, a bureaucrat or a good civil servant was the one who was very good at following the rule book. So in a single sentence, I would say that this heralds a departure from rule to role. And now that the role of a civil servant has undergone different dimensions, and it's also required some amount of specialized task and specialized responsibilities, also involving expertise. Like, for example, technology, science has crept in everywhere. If you have agriculture, for example, in the agriculture sector, we have soil health card, we have drone-driven agriculture, farming, etc. We have telemedicine, we have smart city programs, also heavily dependent on geospatial technology, etc., etc. So Mission Karmayogi is an option which is done after a tremendous effort, very diligently, carried out after about 2-3 years of repeated exercises, which enables a civil servant to prepare himself to build his capacity for the role that he's going to take over once he moves over from one. Because earlier on, what was happening is that, for example, a civil servant happens to be a health secretary today. Now he's been taught in the academy to impose the writ Iqbal of the Sarkar. So he has to pose as if he knows more medicine than a doctor. I don't grudge that, but then, in order to, next day he becomes an agriculture secretary. So he has to, pretend to be knowing agriculture more than the agriculturists, but here actually he would be prepared. So that will also give him a certain amount of confidence and enable him to make a more meaningful contribution. And this is going to be based on app, on through the mobile. This also have a provision of self-assessment of the individual officer of where he stands in the endeavor that he's undertaking.
Especially, sir, in the pandemic time, we saw there is more emphasis on training for civil servants. There should be emphasis more on competency, compassion, and also to deal with people well. And let's say there are schemes also how to carry it out well. So there is a whole lot of emphasis on how to train the civil servants much better.
I think the capacity building has been given a huge emphasis in the last 7-8 years. And that's also because Prime Minister Modi himself takes a lot of interest. And he's also replicated some of the good practices in governance which he had introduced when he was in Gujarat. Like, for example, this abolition of interviews was what was practiced over there. And then making the role of a collector more oriented to his work rather than, going around with the politicians and ministers just touring around. So that's what we saw in the pandemic, as you rightly mentioned. It was again Prime Minister Modi who, few years back, I think around 2016-17, introduced a new initiative of having 3 months stint for each of the civil servants after he came out of the Shastri Academy from Mussoorie. So before the individual officer went to his or her state cadre, we would expect him or her to spend 3 months in the central secretariat, going to different ministries. So that would give them an idea of the orientation of the Modi government, the priorities of the Modi government, the flagship, and also carry culture to the state. Otherwise, sometimes, these youngsters would get confused because such a heterogeneous setup in every state. And these youngsters have done exceptionally well during the pandemic times.
Okay.
Because in the pandemic, all of us who in the ministry were assigned to monitor certain number of districts. So I too was monitoring 22 districts. Similarly, others also. And I visibly experienced that those who had gone through this 3 months, stint, and there's a new designation called Assistant Secretary, were always full of confidence. They had more capacity to take decisions and initiatives.
I was also talking about good governance index, an idea that has been floated and which is like emphasizing on everything like benchmarking, ethics, probity. There are different parameters on which in a very structured way looking at how good governance can be initiated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a new concept. And again, the credit goes to Prime Minister Modi. He has tried to objectify and, make every process more objective than subjective. Now, even the assessment of the level of governance is no longer based on the objective assessment of a boss or a senior or a minister. It has a scientific, parameter, so which determines which district stands. It's based on certain indices. And I think this experiment was carried out again on the direction of Prime Minister Modi when we hit upon the concept of aspirational districts. Earlier on, the earlier government would designate a certain district as a backward district, depending upon the perceptions and the optics. Now, it's not backward necessarily. We have about 40 odd indices. So, district could otherwise be doing very well in education, but be lagging behind in the health sector. So, how best to bring it up? So, district in comparison with the best performing district of the state, vis-a-vis best performing of the country. So, same is the process being followed by us in the governance index determination as well.
And one maxim that we have really been watching and hearing about is minimum government and maximum governance. So tell us more about that. Is it really happening on the ground?
No, I think absolutely so, because I think the very sense, because when Prime Minister introduced this, many would not have understood what it meant or may thought it's just a coining of a phrase. But actually it means a masterly inattention on the part of the government. So you keep watching and then decide where actually to intervene instead of appearing to be, intervening when not required, so that you don't actually impose on the process of governance. So let the governance happen. As they said, the government has no business to be in business. So that has reflected actually also in other sectors where a lot of privatization has happened. Even, for example, I'm dealing with space, so unlocking of space. So all these things, I think they are pointed to this concept and this commitment of allowing maximum governance.
You talked about other ministries as well, whether it's Ministry of Earth Sciences, Ministry of Science and Technology. Also, there is a lot of emphasis on digitization and technological interventions. How would you really look at this whole digital infrastructure being looked at?
You see, as you would also appreciate, that there's no option now to go technically savvy and to go in for digitalization, other these modern means of science-based governance and science-based working. But Prime Minister Modi has actually expedited the process. We are rather little too late, India, both at the social level as well as the government level, because we had a different kind of a legacy. We'd come through many centuries of a feudal legacy. But now that we are looking up to become a part of the global world and to play a major part of the global arena, we have to live up to the global benchmarks. And that is not possible without digitalization. So digitalization has now virtually, and I think the best vindication came during the pandemic time, at least in this ministry, the Ministry of Personnel, where we are sitting right now. Not a single hour's work got interrupted, even during the lockdown. We had work from home. It was this ministry which was formulating the guidelines for the other ministries also. Even when we had 50% people working from home, the output was same, on occasions more than that. So one of the junior officers told me that the new mantra should be maximum output, minimum attendance, because the officials were working even during the weekends, even during holidays.
You mean to say productivity increased actually?
Yes, so it was more of productivity related, result oriented, which did not interrupt. So the pandemic could not interfere because we had already got tuned to that. In fact, I was in the donor ministry, and the donor was the first ministry to go online, because I realized that we had to be regularly in communication with Shillong, where we had the NEC headquarters. So that way we were already tuned. So I'm glad that it was again a futuristic approach of the Modi government, which had already equipped us to deal with the constraints of the pandemic.
And this whole mantra, which you have also referred to already, but transform, reform, perform. So a lot of emphasis on delivery processes and performance. What would you say about it?
Yes, delivery and also last man delivery. I think Prime Minister has given us a kind of a culture where we tend to combine the best of the modernity without, giving up on our traditional heritage. So, following the concept of Antodaya, which is also part of the ideal mantra given by the organization I come from. So, Antodaya, the concept given by Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, is reaching out to the last man in the last queue. So, that is actually the benchmark or the litmus test. And that's what has happened. Now, DBT, for example, again using the technology, direct benefit transfer. So, it's reaching to the person who requires it, who deserves it, who's entitled to it, not through the middlemen. So middlemen have been largely, done away with, because many of the much of the delivery would fall short by the middleman itself, would hardly reach to the person. So that way, I think in other programs as well, whether it's for Ujjwala, it has been last man delivery, and that has also been, I think, most notably, which is difficult for any political dispensation to exercise, is that regardless of caste, creed, region, or vote bank consideration, this has gone where it was required.
Another thing which I think this government is really emphasizing on, but I see it also as a challenge maybe, which you all must be addressing, is about transparency and accountability. So how to make a government which is corruption free? In fact, you gave a very important speech talking about Lokpal. What would you say? How are we really emphasizing on that factor?
See, when this government came, Prime Minister Modi said we'll follow an approach of zero tolerance towards corruption. I don't know how seriously that was taken, because by that time the citizen mind was quite cynic, and they had heard, series of leaders successively talking like this. But we have actually walked the talk. For example, if you take the Prevention of Corruption Act, which was brought in 1988, it was after 30 long years under this government, and through DOPT, an amendment was brought in. The bribe giver, for example, was also made culpable to the offence. At the same time, certain safeguards for the well-performing officers. So, on the one hand, the approach was to be more strict while checking corruption in the larger firms and corporates as well involving. And at the same time, also to give protection to the well-performing honest officers, so they're able to perform to the best of their potential and abilities. So, that approach has actually paid off, and I think the cue has come from the top, because over the last 8 years, none of the ministers in the Modi government has been found to be inviting any insinuation or charge of having indulged in a corruption or a corrupt scam. Whereas even today, you have skeletons coming out of the earlier governments, which normally doesn't happen. It's the incumbent government which actually is exposed to corruption charges. It's the other way around, which itself speaks volumes. So I think overall the transparency has increased. The use of technology has itself proved to be a huge impediment on corrupt practices, because the human interface where it was not required has been done away with. So I think all these things, huge amount of technological intervention.
I think, and there are a lot of mechanisms in place. For example, if you talk about grievance redressal, the whole system has also been, technologically pushed. So, I mean, there are cases which are more in numbers. How do you see it? Is it a matter of concern, or do you think that these are positive aspects?
I'm glad that you asked this, because that gives me an opportunity to also, because I'm also looking after the Department of Administrative Reforms and Grievances. When we came in 2014, the average number of grievances per year was just about 2 lakh. Today it is 25 lakh. We're virtually gone up 12, 13 times. And when I was sharing this with some of the media friends, they said, is it so that there are more number of complaints being registered against the Modi government? I said, no, it's because we have been prompt, we have been sincere, we have followed timelines. So people's confidence have been, earlier on, the grievances never went, they went unaddressed. So people lost interest. There's no point filing or registering. Now they come forward. We keep a timeline. In fact, when we switched over to this CP-gram, in the beginning, I would myself on every Friday evening make random calls to the complainants to find out their level of satisfaction. We are still trying to improve upon it, because disposal is one aspect, this satisfaction the other aspect. So we'll also try to improve all that, so that we can also guide and counsel the complainant of how further to go beyond, even if the grievance is not being addressed to his or her satisfaction. But what we have done is that now we follow a timeline. In case we are not able to respond within a period of maximum 2 weeks, then we explain to the complainant the reason for this. So there's a lot of transparency involved now, even in the redressal of grievance.
And as far as pensions are concerned, there have been new initiatives there as well. For example, face recognition system, reaching out to those who really need it, and many such things.
Yeah, you particularly mentioned here that when I came in 2014, something which would hurt me was that you would ask an elderly person to produce the certificate of his being alive. So having come from a medical background, I said I have seen people asking for a death certificate of one of their deceased ones, but this is quite inhuman, asking someone to produce a certificate that he's alive. And actually, I was doing so because I used to gather family pension of one of my old relatives. So since I was a doctor, I used to write the certificate myself, so I could get away. So I said, we have to find a way out. And now we have technology. So immediately we switched over to biometric means. But then of late, then we realized that after a certain age, even the biometric is not very reliable, because these haath ki lakeerein, they undergo some kind of changes. So now we have introduced face recognition technology. I think we are among the first to use this technology, and that too in the context of the pension. So we have linked it to the Aadhaar card. An elderly person has just to look at in the mobile camera. Immediately his picture gets connected to Aadhaar, and the certificate is produced before the concerned officer. Similarly for women, like for example, I think you'll be interested to know, because you're dealing with the gender issues. The separated daughters were not entitled to the family pension of their parent unless they could actually get a judgment from the court of law that the divorce had been taken. And sometimes the divorce cases linger on for decades together. So they would be deprived of the support when they actually required it the most. So we have simplified it. Now the only evidence required is that a daughter has to just furnish the evidence of she having filed a suit of divorce, regardless of what is the status of the case, and we allow family pension to her. Similarly, family pension for Divyangs. Thirdly, many of the elders are not able to reach the bank. We adopted a novel method, innovative method of using the post office services. So we use the postman to deliver this. And that has helped us even during the pandemic times.
As far as DOPT is concerned, I would come to certain elements talking about UPSC. I mean, reinventing is the order. So how are you looking at some of the rules and guidelines with a fresh approach? We're also talking about the recruitment process. We're also talking about finding the best talent, who should really come in. And there are many such elements at place. We are also talking about NRA, CET, all those things. Would you like to really take up those?
Yeah. It's a long actually issue. I think to try to simplify it, we have try to start from pre-entry, then intra-entry, and then post-entry. So pre-entry means at Labasana, in the Mussoorie itself. The curriculum is also always sought to be changed. We had a huge emphasis on humanities. Now since everything is getting science-based, so we have made certain modifications in the visiting faculty, also in the curriculum. Then afterwards, the assistant secretary stint here, that is intra. Then also having lateral entry in a more institutionalized manner. Letter entry used to happen earlier also. In the earlier government, it's more of subjective. So I find you suitable for something, I simply appoint you. It doesn't happen now. For letter entry also, we put out advertisement, we invite applications, we allow the process to go through the UPSC, so that we have the best of the best talent for whatever task we are looking for. And then post, I am saying that even before pension and before the superannuation, we are organizing workshops, because age at 60 is too young these days. So they are in the prime of their experience. We don't want to lose out that resource. So I think we have tried to look at it in a more harmonious manner. And NRA, as you said, is going to be a huge reform, even social reform, because through that we'll have a common eligibility test be conducted. Earlier on, what was happening is, the one day you have a railway entrance test at Chandigarh, other day you have banking in Delhi, third day you have the CSS, maybe in other metro city, Pune, and it's really difficult, sometimes not even affordable for an average youth, and particularly for the daughters. So their parents would compromise. Ke is baar chalo beti iska de diya, agli baar so this common eligibility test will have a single test for entrance, the first stage test, and it will remain valid for 3 years. That merit can be used depending on the availability of those. And I think the most path-breaking aspect is that we'll have at least one center in each of the 760 odd districts of the country, so that the youth doesn't have to go around, looking for a center where is.
You also talked about ease of governance. I come to Atmanirbhar concept, this vocal for local, also joining hands where it's needed with private players. For example, in space and technology, you're receiving a lot of proposals now from startups. In fact, there is a lot of emphasis on startups and their promotion.
Yeah, you'll be surprised to know that ever since this opening up has happened, just about a year or so back, or 2 years, we now have at least 50 startups doing very well. And some of them, startups of the global level. And prior to that, I think this is something only Prime Minister Modi could have initiated. Prior to that, we were living in a taboo. So many of the taboos of the past have been broken under Prime Minister Modi. Rarely we would come across a single column news in the remote part of a newspaper with a dateline Sriharikota. Nobody knew what it was, and some rocket would be launched. Now space technology has entered virtually every household, every sector, and after unlocking it, as is being mentioned in the media, the private players are coming, youngsters coming, preparing nano satellites. So they have become active partners in nation building through space technology, which has actually placed India in the front line as a frontline nation.
And, talking about other things, for example, IMD is now doing also very well. So, there is a lot of emphasis on people's participation as well. I mean, we are looking at governance from two ways now.
Yes. Citizen outsourcing now. Now, as I said, crowdsourcing. So the citizen then informs about the weather and also puts up there, and we use his inputs as well. And otherwise, also IMD has is now achieved such a kind of accuracy to the minute now. We have Doppler radars coupled with space technology. So we have multiple means of making forecasts. So much so that our forecast and our disaster prediction is now being also availed by the neighboring countries like Nepal, etc.
Okay.
And the SARC satellite, which was also conceived by Prime Minister Modi, is also catering to a great extent to this.
I come to a very, very important subject, which is Vision India in 2047. So we have a very forward-looking approach to governance. Tell us more about that.
We are actually into it, trying to formulate a document. I think first, what is required first is to visualize the indices that would happen in 2047. Inadvertently, consciously or subconsciously, unconsciously, we tend to look at 2047 through the prism of 2022. How 2047 would be 25 years hence, we try to look from the perspective today, because it's difficult to visualize. But if you look back 25 years back, say maybe 1995, 96, you would see what sounded to be revolutionary in those times. The malls, the courier service is now obsolete. So similarly, it's difficult. So we first need to have indices in place, and then we are already working on. It requires tremendous research, so that when India turns 100, because as Prime Minister has been saying repeatedly about the Amrit Mahotsav, so these 25 years are going to be very vital, because this will determine India's place in the world arena. And to be able to live up to that responsibility of Century India, I think this vision document, or Vision 47, is what is all about.
Some technical points here, talking about cadres, talking about some changes in administrative rules as far as states, UTs are concerned. There have been a lot of talk now about that. And I'm sure that DOPT is looking with a very vast prism there. Would you like to talk about it?
No, I don't wish to get into the unwarranted controversy, but certain sections of the media and the opinion have tended to misinterpret it as something like interference into the federal system. On the contrary, Prime Minister Modi has strengthened the federal system. The state share has gone up, even in the capital. And here, what was happening is that the officers sometimes were at disadvantage because they were not getting the opportunity of central deputation. So they would face problems during empanelment, promotions, etc. So we have just made a suggestion to the states and asked for their opinion actually as to how best to streamline this mechanism.
You're also chairman of IIPA. Talking about the institution, what would you say? There have been a lot of digital interface there as well, a lot of emphasis on how to train bureaucrats better. What would you say?
I think one of the biggest reforms in the IIPA after I was entrusted with the responsibility of taking over the chair was that we have made it open. Earlier, it was the membership was open only to the superannuated officers. So I said we don't need to have a retired officers club. We need to make it vibrant with multiple generations interacting and educating each other. So that has given it a new kind of a look, also a new confidence. And we look forward to develop it as an important research institute catering to civil services, not only within the government, but also outside the government. And I'm sure in a year or so, we'll be able to achieve that goal.
There have been a lot of questions which you've very patiently answered, sir. Talking about your own regimented routine, because a lot of youngsters would also watch this interview. What is your tip how to maintain a very focused work ethos, manage your day well, and then look at, balance of work and life?
No, it's just that it's more, I think more of time management. And that's about all, because even here in Delhi, I keep rotating at 7-8 places. But I think when you are focused and when you are urged, the energy comes naturally. So it's maybe energy out of will rather than the physical.
Any such message to a lot of young people who want to come into administration? Public administration is a subject that we're talking about.
I think the message to the young people is that I would rather envy them because they are living in the best of the times. India of 2022 is actually India of the youth, because 70% of them below the age of 40, the entire priorities are being determined from their point of view, and we are actually the minority. So, and so much is going to happen in the next few years, and they are going to be, it's unimaginable till few years ago that we would have Indians heading Twitter, Indians heading Google, all these things happening now. So, an Indian going abroad is looked up to with a great esteem. So, I think the best of the times now for you.
We're also on social media. In fact, now when earlier we did not see a lot of, civil servants out there using social media. What would you say that?
Yeah, within certain norms of decorum or sanctity or maryada, there is no harm in, putting across your view as long as it does not interfere with your, with the government, the confidentiality of the assignment given to you.
And one maybe could be the last question, though the interviewers are always tempted to ask more, is the administrative framework. What is your own vision, the roadmap now for everyone to follow?
I think by 2047, as you were saying, we might be heading for a governance, though it's difficult to visualize. But those of us who are around that time would see that there will be very little human interface. Things would start happening so easily. And what Prime Minister Modi today says, maximum governance, would actually become very much visible. It will be absolutely maximum governance with a very little requirement of an intervention from the government side or even from the human side.
Thank you so much, sir, for talking to us and answering all these questions. And this was a very special moment for all of us. And thank you so much for watching this very special interview. We'll keep bringing you more episodes, more interviews, more personalities. Thank you. Namaskar.